Looking back, I think the whole thing started because I was just ready to grow as a person. You know, like Adam and I had this amazing beginning. We met in Miami during my friend Sarah's birthday trip in 2015, and there was just this instant connection. He was visiting from out of state, and we spent the entire weekend talking about everything: art, travel, life goals, the kind of deep conversations you never get to have with most people. When he started flying to Atlanta every weekend to see me, I thought, this is it. This is what real love looks like. The long distance thing was actually kind of romantic at first. Every Friday night, I'd get butterflies knowing he was on his way. And we'd have these incredible weekends packed with new restaurants and museums and just exploring the city together. When he proposed in 2016, I literally cried for 20 minutes. Our wedding in 2017 was perfect, small and intimate. Exactly what I'd always dreamed of. We had this beautiful ceremony at this little venue outside the city. And I remember thinking as I walked down the aisle that I was the luckiest woman alive. The first few years of marriage were really good too. We traveled to Italy and Thailand, bought this gorgeous house in this up-and-coming neighborhood, and everything felt like it was falling into place. We even started trying to have kids, though that whole process with the fertility testing was honestly more stressful than I expected. All those appointments and procedures and tracking everything. It kind of took some of the romance out of it, if I'm being honest. But somewhere around 2020, I started feeling like something was missing. Not with Adam exactly, but just with my life in general. I felt like I was becoming this person I didn't recognize, just going through the motions of work and dinner and Netflix and bed, over and over. I started staying up later, just scrolling through my phone and reading about different ways people were living their lives. I found these online communities where people talked about personal growth and pushing boundaries and not just accepting that this is all there is. I made some new friends through art classes and local events. People who were actually interested in deep conversations about life and meaning and all the stuff Adam never seemed to want to discuss. Don't get me wrong, Adam's a good guy, but he's always been pretty surface level about emotional stuff. These new friends got that part of me that craves something more meaningful. Adam started asking questions about why I was always on my phone, who I was texting so late at night, and honestly, it felt kind of controlling. Like, sorry, I'm not content to just talk to the same 5 people from your work for the rest of my life. These were interesting conversations with people who understood that marriage doesn't mean you stop growing as an individual. But Adam wouldn't get that. He's perfectly happy in his little routine where nothing ever changes. I met this guy, Marcus, at a local art exhibit who was actually interested in my photography work. We'd text about creative projects and philosophy, the kind of intellectual conversations that just weren't happening at home. There was this whole community of people on different apps and forums who were exploring alternative relationship styles and questioning traditional monogamy. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was learning and growing again. The thing is, I wasn't doing anything wrong. These were just friendships that Adam wouldn't understand because he's never been interested in examining whether the way we're living is actually making us happy. But I could tell he was getting more suspicious, asking more questions. And I realized I needed to just be completely honest about what I was going through. So on this random Tuesday night in early 2021, I decided to have a real conversation with him about where we were as a couple. I'd been thinking about it for weeks, and I knew this was the mature way to handle things instead of just letting resentment build up. Adam, I said while we were sitting in the living room after dinner, I think we should consider an open marriage, just for a while. He looked up from his laptop with this expression I couldn't quite read. Is there someone else? Of course not. I said, this is about us, about personal growth and not feeling restricted by traditional ideas about monogamy that maybe don't work for everyone. I explained how I'd been reading about couples who use this kind of arrangement to strengthen their relationship, how it's actually healthier than pretending you never find other people attractive. I told him I felt like we'd gotten into this routine where we weren't really challenging ourselves or experiencing new things, and maybe having some space to explore who we are as individuals would help us appreciate what we have together. You want an open marriage? He said, and his voice was weirdly calm. Fine, let's try it. I was honestly surprised by how easily he agreed. Part of me had been worried he'd get all dramatic about it, but this was exactly the kind of mature response I'd hoped for. We talked about some basic ground rules. Honesty about what we were doing, always using protection, keeping it separate from our home life. It felt like we were finally communicating as equals about our relationship. Within a few weeks, I met Wesley at this trendy bar downtown. He was completely different from Adam. 24, covered in these beautiful tattoos, played guitar in a local band. There was something so refreshing about his energy, the way he saw the world. Sure, he was still figuring some things out, like he lived with his mom while he saved money for his own place. But that just showed he was responsible about his goals. Wesley made me feel young and free in a way I hadn't experienced in years. We'd go to these little dive bars where his friends hung out, and I'd listen to him play guitar, and it was like remembering who I used to be before I got caught up in mortgages and dinner parties, and all the boring adult stuff that had somehow taken over my life. Meanwhile, Adam seemed to be adjusting to the arrangement pretty well. He mentioned he was going out more, meeting people, and I was happy he was finally pushing himself socially. For the first month or so, everything felt like it was working exactly the way it was supposed to. But then Wesley started getting busy with work and band stuff, not texting as much, and I noticed Adam was actually going out a lot more than I'd expected, like multiple times a week. When I asked him about it, he'd just say he was exploring his options in this casual way that started to bug me. "Who exactly are you seeing?" I asked him one night when he came home pretty late. "We're in an open marriage. Remember?" He said. "This is what you wanted." The way he said it felt kind of harsh, like he was throwing it back in my face. I wasn't being jealous or anything. I was just concerned about our marriage and making sure we were still prioritizing each other. But he started acting like any questions I asked were somehow unreasonable. I found out through casual conversation that he was seeing this gym instructor named Leah, and also this single mom he'd met on Bumble named Camille, and apparently he'd reconnected with some college friend named Serena. 3 different women, and he was acting like this was totally normal. Meanwhile, Wesley had basically ghosted me. I'd text him about getting together, and he'd take days to respond, if he responded at all. When I finally asked him what was going on, he gave me this whole speech about needing to focus on his music and not being ready for anything serious, which was fine, I guess. But the timing felt pretty suspicious. I think we should revisit our boundaries. I told Adam after about 6 weeks of this, make sure we're both still getting what we need from our marriage. He just looked at me with this expression like I was being ridiculous. "What exactly do you want to revisit?" "I just think maybe we jumped into this too fast," I said. "Maybe we should slow things down. Focus more on us. So you want me to stop seeing other women? Because you lost yours." I couldn't believe how cold he was being about it. This wasn't about Wesley. This was about protecting our marriage and making sure we weren't losing sight of what really mattered. But Adam was acting like I was being some kind of hypocrite instead of just trying to course correct when I saw things weren't working the way we'd planned. "I miss us," I told him a few days later. "This didn't turn out the way I thought it would. What did you think would happen?" "Brittany, I thought we'd both explore a little and then appreciate what we have together even more. I thought this would bring us closer." He just stared at me for a long moment. "I want a divorce. I literally felt the air leave my lungs. What? I'm done with this marriage." "Adam, wait. Please don't do this. We can work through this. Couples go through rough patches all the time. This is exactly the kind of thing therapy is for." But he just walked away like the conversation was over. Like 6 years of marriage could just be dismissed because we had a bump in the road. 3 days later, he presented me with actual divorce papers. I kept thinking he was bluffing, trying to scare me into backing down. But his whole demeanor was just so detached and cold. This wasn't the man I married. The Adam I fell in love with would never throw away our entire relationship over a temporary rough patch. "You're really gonna blow up our marriage over this?" I asked him. "I'm not blowing up anything," he said. "I'm just accepting what's already happened." The whole legal process was honestly a nightmare. My lawyer kept telling me that Adam had a strong case, which didn't even make sense to me. A strong case for what? Because I'd suggested we try something different. Because I was honest about my needs instead of just suffering in silence. It turned out Adam had been collecting evidence the entire time. Screenshots of text messages, recordings of conversations. All this stuff that felt like such a violation of trust. Instead of just talking to me about his concerns, he'd been building some kind of legal strategy, like I was his enemy instead of his wife. The worst part was how emotionally detached he was through the whole process. In mediation, he'd just sit there answering questions in this flat, factual tone like he was discussing a business transaction. No emotion. No acknowledgement of what we'd meant to each other. Nothing. His lawyer, Brian, would present all this evidence about my behavior. And Adam would just nod along like he was watching a movie about strangers. I fought for the house because honestly, I'd put just as much into making it a home as he had. But apparently his income documentation and credit history made him the primary owner or whatever. I ended up having to accept this tiny buyout and move into a condo across town while he got to keep the life we'd built together. The whole thing took months. And by the time it was finalized, I barely recognized the person Adam had become. People kept telling me how good he looked, how much weight he'd lost, how confident he seemed. Like our divorce was the best thing that ever happened to him. I tried texting him a few times after everything was settled. Just normal stuff about mail that was still being delivered to the house, or questions about insurance paperwork. He never responded to any of it. Not once. Like I was some stranger who'd never meant anything to him. About 3 months ago, I ran into him at Whole Foods. I almost didn't recognize him at first. He'd lost even more weight, was dressed really well, just carried himself completely differently. When he saw me, he didn't even seem surprised or uncomfortable. Just said hi. Brittany, like I was some acquaintance from work. How are you doing? I asked, trying to keep things light and friendly. I'm good, he said, and kept looking at the produce like he was in a hurry. We should grab coffee sometime, I said. Just to catch up. We were friends before we were married. No thanks, he said, not even looking at me. As he walked away, I called after him. I miss us sometimes. He turned around and looked at me with this expression that was just completely blank. That was it. He just continued shopping like I wasn't even there. I keep thinking about that moment and how unnecessary his coldness was. Like, I get that divorce is hard and people need time to process. But we're both adults. We shared 6 years of our lives together. The fact that he can't even be civil when we run into each other just shows how immature he's being about the whole situation. Everyone acted like I was being so unreasonable. But all I ever wanted was for us both to grow as people and not get trapped in some boring routine that wasn't making either of us happy. I was trying to save our marriage by being honest about what I needed. And instead of working with me, Adam just decided it was easier to throw everything away and start over. I see posts sometimes from mutual friends showing him at parties or events, always with different women. And it's like he's become this completely different person. The Adam I married would never have been comfortable being that social or casual about dating. It's like the divorce turned him into someone I never knew. My therapist says I need to focus on my own healing and stop worrying about what Adam is doing with his life. But it's hard not to feel frustrated when I see how everyone just accepted his version of events. Like I was the villain in some story where I was really just trying to be honest about what I was going through. I'm in a much better place now. The condo is actually pretty nice once I got it decorated the way I wanted, and I'm not having to compromise on every little decision like I was when I was married. I've been focusing on my photography again, taking classes, meeting new people who actually appreciate artistic expression. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if Adam had just been willing to communicate instead of shutting down every time things got complicated. If he'd been open to couples therapy or even just honest conversations about what we both needed from our relationship. But I guess some people just aren't equipped to handle the kind of growth that real partnerships require. I'm not bitter about it anymore. If anything, I'm grateful that I learned these things about him before we wasted even more years trying to make something work that was never going to satisfy either of us. I deserve someone who supports my journey and doesn't make me feel guilty for wanting more out of life than just paying bills and watching Netflix every night. The whole experience taught me a lot about what I actually want in a partner. Someone who's emotionally available, who's interested in deep conversations, who doesn't get threatened when I want to explore new aspects of myself. Adam was never really that person. I just convinced myself he was because we had good chemistry and similar taste in restaurants. It's been almost a year now since everything was finalized, and I can honestly say I'm happier than I've been in a long time. I'm dating again, nothing serious, just meeting interesting people and seeing what develops naturally. I'm not in any rush to get married again. I want to make sure that if I do commit to someone, it's because we're genuinely compatible on all the levels that actually matter. Looking back, I think the whole situation could have been avoided if Adam had just been more mature about the whole thing. But people react to change differently, and some people just can't handle it when their partner wants to grow beyond the person they were when they first got together. That's his loss. Honestly, I know who I am and what I bring to a relationship. And someday, I'll find someone who actually appreciates that, instead of trying to keep me in some box that makes them comfortable.